is the cause of heart attacks are caused mostly by clots. So there's a normal artery, and the lumen is the opening in the middle where the blood flows. And then as you eat unhealthily and put plaque and fat around your heart, it doesn't occlude or encroach on the lumen. The blood vessel starts to remodel outwardly. It makes so that it doesn't interfere with blood flow when you start to put down young plaque and gain weight and eat unhealthily. Now, as you're putting down this young plaque, and the blood vessel is expanding and growing outward, not occluding the lumen, most of that fat is soft fat. And it starts to put a thin calcification on the interior lining of the endothelium. You see where it says calcified fibrous cap? So it's a thin cap separating the lumen from that lipid core. That's what makes this so dangerous, because the calcified cap between the blood vessel lumen and the lipid core is so thin, and it could crack and expose the lipid to the interior wall of the blood vessels. And you know what happens when you expose the lumen in the bottom right picture there? If that blood vessel cracks and some of that fat gets exposed, that's going to signal the blood to throw a clot to form. The medical term for a clot is called a thrombus, and a traveling clot is called an embolus. And thrombi and emboli, plural or singular, are the major cause of both heart attacks and strokes. What I'm saying to you right now, it's the newly laid down plaque that's most vulnerable and most dangerous, not the old plaque, because the old plaque, called obstructive plaque, that's been there for years, calcifies over. The calcified cap gets thicker, separating the lipid core from the lumen. And as it encroaches on the lumen and restricts blood flow, it makes it safer, less likely to cause a heart attack, because those older plaques that are more calcified have been infiltrated with smooth muscle and scar tissue, and they're not likely to rupture, exposing the lipid component into the blood vessel, exciting a clot as much as the newly laid down plaque. And that's why that most heart attacks occur around Christmas time, around New Year's, when people come back from cruises and overeat, and when they gain weight, when they put on 5 pounds. In other words, you want to have a heart attack? Here's what you do. Go on a fad diet and lose 20 pounds, and then go back and put back 30. Because the rapid regain of weight, you can only put back subcutaneous fat so quickly. You'll put back visceral fat and cardiac fat as you put on weight that rapidly. Binge over the holidays. That's how you have a heart attack. Why am I telling you this anyway? What does this have to do with the point here? And what it has to do with it, I'm showing you that placing a stent in the obstructive areas of the heart are not going to have you protect your future from heart attacks and strokes, because the cardiologists, with their calcium scores and their cardiac catheterizations and angiograms or whatever they're doing, they only expose and identify the vessels that have old plaque. And they treat those vessels to make you feel better. But that doesn't make you live longer, because it's the other plaques that aren't visible, that didn't encroach on the lumen, that are the most dangerous. Are you following me now why I'm telling you this? I'm telling you so you know that once you go to a cardiologist and they want to put a stent in you, now they put a foreign body in your heart. And where the stent ends, you have a nidus of inflammation that can increase the risk of having a heart attack. And now they could have put you on a blood thinning medication for the rest of your life. Having that intervention did not lower your risk of future cardiac death. It increased the risk of death, because now you have increased risk of hemorrhagic stroke and gastrointestinal bleed, plus you have the increased risk of having the clot form in your heart. Now you have a foreign body in your heart. The only way to reduce that risk and remove that risk is by not going after conventional medical care, but doing aggressive nutritional care. That's not 100 times more effective. It's 1,000 times more effective. This is what people have to know. The reason I'm telling you this is because I think that if people knew the real dangers and futility of the conventional approach, many more millions of people would look at dietary therapy more seriously and be willing and be considering making this change, don't you think? Because vegetables have tremendous power to restore elasticity and endothelial function, and they do. And the amount of vegetable portions a day is a measurable parameter that determines your risk of your cardiovascular health. Greens melt away heart disease. They're the most effective exciter of the NRF2 transcription proteins that enable the body to create that endothelial slipperiness and removing plaque. The body has the ability, it has built-in mechanisms to remove plaque and prevent plaque adherence. But we have to fuel those mechanisms of reversal with a high exposure to green vegetables. And that's what the studies show, just like the study I showed you yesterday that showed that people who ate the most green vegetables and the highest quintile of green vegetable consumption had the longest lifespan. Did you remember that slide from yesterday? On 130,000 Asians, who the ones who ate the most greens lived the longest, right? And we see the same thing with nut studies, that as people eat more nuts and seeds, we see dropping of LDL cholesterol, dropping of the small, dense LDL particles, and removal of the most dangerous oxidized LDL. And nuts and seeds also have been shown to help restore vascular elasticity and enable the body to accelerate the removal of plaque. We have numerous studies, more than 20, represented by this 5, the Adventist Health Studies, the Ohio Women's Health Study, the Nurses' Health Study, the Physicians' Health Study, and all these studies show the same thing. They all show dramatic reduction in cardiovascular death with the regular inclusion of nuts and seeds in the diet, and they also show reduction in cancer and reduction in all-cause mortality. We talked about yesterday the reduction in cancer, not just from eating seeds, but also from eating nuts, that nuts actually lower cancer rates significantly. The Physicians' Health Study is a great example because in the Physicians' Health Study, the researchers took extreme effort to ascertain the cause of death in people not eating nuts and seeds compared to those who had nuts and seeds. And they found the cause of death, predominantly in people not eating nuts and seeds, were due to sudden cardiac death. The lack of nuts and seeds in the diet was associated with a 60% increased risk of sudden cardiac death, which meant death caused by a cardiac arrhythmia, ventricular fibrillation or ventricular tachycardia. They even did autopsies on the people that died to ascertain the cause of death, and they interviewed the family members to identify those people who died quickly on the spot after their first symptom, and we found a great association between the lack of nuts and seeds in the diet and rapid or sudden cardiac death. You following that? This has been investigated, and it showed that the lack of nuts and seeds and the lack of these beneficial fats in the diet can promote a pro-arrhythmic state of the heart. Where saturated fats are pro-arrhythmic, the deficiencies in polyunsaturated fatty acids can also be pro-arrhythmic as well. You don't often see that when a person is overweight, but as they start to become a more normal weight and they're not eating sufficient nuts and seeds or fat in the diet, you can start to develop increased propensity of the heart to go into an irregular heartbeat. Did you follow that? No? Too bad. Just kidding. What I'm saying here, we don't have to get into all these mechanisms on the slide, but what we're saying here is that there's a dose-dependent relationship, and a low amount of nuts and seeds in the diet, or I could say a higher amount, is not just protective against sudden cardiac death, it's also protective against developing atrial fibrillation. It's also randomized controlled trials also show an increase in blood flow and diastolic function and elasticity. There are lots of reasons why nuts and seeds show beneficial effects on longevity besides their fact that they contain beneficial phytochemicals. They also increase the absorption of phytochemicals and antioxidants and lower reactive oxygen species in the blood because they facilitate the absorption of nutrients from other foods eaten as well. Here's, for example, a meta-analysis putting together multiple studies on cardiovascular mortalities over 350,000 individuals, encompassing more than 44,000 deaths, showing a 39% reduction in cardiovascular deaths in people eating nuts and seeds versus those not. Let me make this clear again. Vioxx, you know what Vioxx is? It's a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug that was taken off the market in 2004. They took it off the market. When they took it off the market, it was the #1 prescribed drug in America. People loved it because it didn't cause gastrointestinal bleed, and they were using it for their pain. Because in preliminary studies on hundreds and hundreds of people, it found that people liked it better and it was getting good results. It wasn't until it was launched into the atmosphere of millions of people using it that we found it caused 100,000 premature deaths from heart attacks that they had to take it off the market. They didn't find out it was dangerous until millions of people adopted it, and then they had to take it off the market. You following me? When we launch these diets to large numbers of people, we have the chance to see their effects that may not be easily seen when you have a small number of people, because their incidence isn't that high of these diseases. And when we launch diets low in nuts and seeds to large numbers of people, we always see the same outcome: higher risk of premature death. You following that? And don't think that you eat one diet to prevent cancer, like green vegetables prevent cancer. But once you get cancer, there's a different diet you eat. Now you don't eat green vegetables. No, it's not the way it works. The way it works is the same diet that prevents cancer is the same diet that's most effective to prevent recurrence and to increase longevity and to reverse cancer when you have it. The same diet that maximally prevents heart disease is the diet that most effectively reverses heart disease and protects you from having an irregular heartbeat or sudden cardiac death when you have heart disease. It's not one diet for preventing it, another diet when you have it. That's illogical and ridiculous. The Seventh-day Adventist Health Study 2 was particularly impressive because they divided nut and seed intake into 5 different quintiles, and they found that the risk of death from people in the lowest quintile of nut and seed consumption compared to the highest quintile was a 39% difference in cardiovascular mortality, which was huge. And this study was so important because it found that the same risk was present in all demographics: men, women, young, old, black, white, Asian, vegans, vegetarians, non-vegans. No matter what the demographic was, it showed the same basic negative effects from not eating nuts and seeds compared to those. And the lowest quintile was eating about a third of an ounce of nuts and seeds a day, the lowest quintile. The highest quintiles were eating about 1.5 ounces a day or something like that. It wasn't huge amounts of nuts and seeds, but it showed that, wow, that's kind of amazing. The difference between like 1/3 of an ounce to like 1 ounce and a third, just a 1 ounce difference a day, made such a huge difference in death. That's amazing data to put into our brains. You following this? We don't want to make decisions based on absence of information.